This is the advanced workflow tutorial, and in this video we are going to be going over every action, every trigger, and some different tips and tricks that you can use that will help optimize your process and also your workflow building. A few things on this page before we go into the actions is the ability to add a payment schedule here at the top. And we'll cover a little bit later on what this is for and how to use that. But the payment schedules can be placed here, and then the workflow can look at the different due dates that you have associated with that payment schedule. And like I said, we'll look at that a little bit later. But the next thing we'll do is we'll add in an action, and then we'll take a look at all the different actions you can use. The first action we're going to take a look at is change project status. And in the project section, you can create different statuses for the leads and jobs that you've created. And typically this will be where the client is at in the process. It's a great way to organize clients so you can tell where they are and what they've been sent. And how this relates to the workflow is once you've done a specific action, you can move them into a different status that you've created. So if we choose this option, change project status, and we'll cover this section here a little bit later on the different triggers and the when section, but we'll look down here at status for project. So if I choose change project status and click the drop down, it'll give me a list of all the different statuses that I've created. So if I've already sent a questionnaire to the client and then I want them to go into the questionnaire sent status, then I can just choose that there, click apply, and then right after the questionnaire gets sent out, it would move them into the questionnaire sent status. The next action we'll take a look at is add tag. And within the project section, you have the ability to group projects together with a tag. For instance, if I'm a photographer, I could group all my newborn projects together, or my headshots or family clients, however you want to categorize them. And with this action, you can have the workflow tag the project for you at any point in the process. So if I choose add tag, and then down here, it'll give you a list of all the different tags that you've created. So if I want this project to be in my headshots category, I can click headshots, and when it gets to this action in the workflow, it would mark it with that tag. The next action we'll take a look at is send email. And send email will be the action you use if you're planning on sending a text-only email. If you have an email that has an attachment with it, if you're sending out a questionnaire or a proposal, then you'll use either send form or you can use send contract. But this will be if you're just planning on sending an email with just text in it. So if I click send email, and you'll see the drop down here, if I click that, it'll give me a list of all the canned responses that I have in my template section. So one thing that can help out a lot with building a workflow is having your canned emails prepared ahead of time so that you can just come into the list here, find the email that you want, and load it right up. Now, you do have the ability to create your own emails here in the body, and this will just be for the workflow that you're building it in. So this won't get saved to your canned emails to be used for later, but you can build one on the fly here and then click apply down at the bottom. The next action we will look at is send form, and you will choose this option if you are planning on sending out a questionnaire, a proposal, or a sub-agreement. And the contract has its own separate action, so you can use that for all of your contract sending. But we'll open this up here and click send form. And exclusive to sending a form is the form options, and I'll go over the three of these so you can see the differences between these. So the first one is the most standard way of sending things out, which is just send it by email. And whenever you send a form out to a client, a contract, whenever you're sending something out, that will automatically get uploaded into their client portal. So you won't have to worry about making that a second action. So if you choose send email, it'll automatically get applied to the portal as well so they can view it in the future if they need to. If you're using send email, then it will give you a drop down that will ask you what form it is that you want to send. So in this case, let's say we want to use the follow-up questionnaire. Following this here, once you have your form in the drop down, then you can choose what email you want to send out as well. So you'll choose your form first, and then you'll pick which email you want to accompany that form whenever it's going out. So if I click the drop down here, I'll get a list of all the canned responses that I have. So one thing that can help with workflow building is any form that you're planning on sending to the client have an email that matches that form, because you'll choose the form here and then you can select the email that matches that particular form. So once you have your email, then you're good to go when it comes to sending that out. And one thing you'll need to make sure of when you're sending out your forms is that you have a form link variable in the body of the email that's going out. Now, there are instructions here across the top that says to make sure to use the form link. But once you see it down here, this will be the button that the client will click on that will relate to whatever form you have attached up here. So as long as you have that smart field variable, that will give the client a button to click on. And if you want to send it out just to the portal and not send it via email, then you can use apply to portal. If you're using this option, you won't need an email to attach to the form because it's just going to be going straight to the portal. This is great if you have 4, 5, 6 forms that you want to send out to the client but don't want to send multiple emails out to the client at once. So by choosing apply to portal, you can choose the form that you want, and then the workflow will just automatically forward it into the portal. And then maybe later down the road, you can send them an email with their link and password to get into the portal. And the last option is apply to job only. And this works really well if you have customizations that you need to make to the form before you send it out to the client. What this does is it applies a fresh template to the project, but it doesn't send it anywhere. So it won't be in the portal and it won't be sent out via email. It will just be applied to the job. And as you can see here where it says needs sending, that just means that it's sitting in a waiting area, and you can go in, you can make edits to it, and then whenever you're ready, you can send it out to the client. But that was a breakdown of how you can send out a form. There's different form options you can use, and whichever one works best for your business, you can choose those here. The next action on the list is create to do. And this is great if you want to send a reminder to yourself throughout the process of the workflow. If you need to get something done, if you need to call a client, if you need to do anything manual that doesn't have to do with automatic sending, you can choose create to do, and then it will send you a reminder either on your dashboard or via email what you need to get done. So if I click create to do, the next thing you'll see is the assigned user area. And all this means here is whose dashboard this to-do is going to show up on whenever it gets to that point in the workflow. So if I click my drop down, any multi-users that I have associated with this brand will also show up. So if I click my name here, then whenever it gets to this to-do in the workflow, it will show up on my dashboard. And in the body here, you can write in whatever it is that you want to do. So if I say call client, then that will be what shows up on my dashboard. And you can also send an email reminder out down here, and that will get sent out whenever it gets to that action as well. Now, one thing that can help out whenever you're doing your to-dos in here is using smart fields to show more information on the emails that are sending out and also what's on the dashboard as well. So instead of using call client, I can go into my smart field and I can add in the client's name. And I can also, if I wanted to, go into the client and put in their phone number as well. And what that's going to do is help you whenever that email goes out. You'll be able to see the client's name, you'll be able to see the phone number, and it'll also be on the dashboard as well. So creating to-dos for yourself works really well if there's things you need to accomplish before an action happens. The next action we'll take a look at is send contract. And within each project, you're allowed to have one main or one general contract that gets assigned to that project. Any other sending that you need for secondary contracts or amendments or non-disclosures or anything like that would be considered a sub-agreement, and you can use send form for sending those out. Send contract is if you want to send out your main general agreement to the client. So if I choose send contract, then here in this drop down, it'll give me a list of all the contracts that I have, and you can choose which one you want. and then you can choose the email that goes out with that contract. And one thing you'll need to make sure of is in the email body that you have the contract link that's in the email body. There's also instructions here that will remind you that you need to have that in there, and this will link up directly to whichever contract you have selected here. And you can also find those smart fields as well underneath smart field and link, and then the contract link. So anytime you need to add that in, if you're just building an email out, you can find those right there in the smart field section. But just make sure you have a smart field link with the contract link in it, and it will link up with whatever one you selected up here. The next action we'll take a look at is send primary invoice. And this action you'll use if you want to send out the invoice to the client via email anywhere in your workflow process. So if I choose send primary invoice, the drop down here will give me a list of all the different canned responses I have, and I can choose which one I want to accompany the invoice when it gets sent out. One thing you'll need to make sure of is in the body of the email that you have the smart field link here that will give the client a button to click on to access the invoice and make a payment. So if you ever want to send the invoice out, just choose send primary invoice and make sure that the invoice link is in the body. The next action we'll take a look at is create invoice. And this is if you're wanting the workflow to create an invoice at any point in time in the workflow process. So if we choose create invoice, what it will do is bring up an invoice template that you can actually build within this action. So if you want to add in new line items, you can add those in there. If you want to choose from the packages that you already have created, you can basically just build a brand new invoice within this action. So anything you want to add, and you can also add in a payment schedule down here. So if you want the workflow to follow a certain payment schedule on this particular invoice, then you can click this drop down and choose which payment schedule you want on the invoice. And there's two things you can do when it comes to sending it out. You can either wait and not use this option, or if you want to send it out via email, you can click this option and then choose the email template that you want to go out with this invoice that you just created. Just make sure that in the body you have the invoice link somewhere in the body of the email, so it gives the client a button to click on so they can access the invoice and make a payment. The next two actions we'll take a look at is activate and deactivate portal. If you want the workflow to activate the portal for you at any point in time in the process or deactivate it, you can use either one of these options. Now, when you choose activate portal, it won't send out the information for your client to get in. It will just unlock it for you. You can follow up this action with an email that has the link and the password in it, but activate portal will simply just turn the portal on for the client. The next action on the list is pause workflow. And pausing the workflow works best if you don't want anything to send out to the client until you manually go in and turn the workflow back on. If you're waiting to hear back from a client or if you're waiting for them to make a decision, pause workflow will stop all other actions from happening until you go into the project and turn it back on again. So if you choose pause workflow, you can choose when you want it to pause, and then just remember to go back into the workflow, unpause it, and then your workflow will resume. And the last action on the list is hold actions until. If you're wanting the workflow to hold all actions until a certain milestone has happened, like the contract being signed or an invoice being paid, you can use this action. The only actions that won't hold is anything that's been given a fixed date or is related to the job. Those actions are on their own time schedule and not affected by this action at all. But if you want the workflow to hold and then everything after that action is dependent on the hold, you can use this action to do that. Now let's take a look at the different triggers. The first thing we'll take a look at is the difference between relative and fixed. And if you're using relative, that just means that whoever you apply this action to will look at their specific milestone and then make that action happen. Using relative is best whenever you're building your templates because then it relates to every job that you apply it to. If you're using the fixed option, this will give you an exact day and time that you want something to go out. And normally using fixed, It works best if you're doing more on-the-fly editing within a certain project. So if you want a certain email to go out at an exact day and time within that project, you can just go into that workflow, add an action, and then use a fixed date. But we'll go over the relative because this will also give us a list of triggers that we can work off of that is for each job. All right, let's take a look at the different triggers that you have to use within the workflow. The first one we'll take a look at is after workflow has started. And what this means is as soon as the workflow gets added to a project, as soon as it's applied, as soon as it's active, that's going to be the beginning marker. So normally within the first couple actions after workflow has started would be the one that you would use most. And over on the left-hand side here, you'll see the ability to choose how long after the workflow has started. So if you want to use 1 day, 2 days, you can change it to hours. We also have days, weeks, years. Any of these will set the parameters on when this action actually happens. So in this case, 2 hours after the workflow has started, whatever action I choose will take off. The next few triggers we'll take a look at are based off of the job dates that you can assign each project. Now, within each project, you can have 2 different dates, a start date and an end date. If you're wanting something to happen on either end of one of those dates, then you can use these 4 options here: before job start date, after the job start date, before job end date, and after the job end date. So you can take a look at those 2 dates that are applied to the job, and depending upon when you want that action to happen, you have 4 different triggers that you can use to make that go. The next trigger we'll take a look at is after form is completed. And this is if you're wanting an action to happen after a certain form that you've sent via the workflow gets completed. So as you can see here, I have a follow-up questionnaire getting sent out immediately after the workflow has started. I also want something to happen after they've filled out that questionnaire. So if I go into add action and I go to my triggers and choose after form is completed, it will give me a drop down of what form the workflow is going to watch to get done. So when I click the drop down, the only form that I've sent out so far in the workflow is the follow-up questionnaire. So if I choose this option, the workflow will wait for that questionnaire to get completed, and then whatever action I choose will take off based off the completion of this form. The next trigger on the list is after scheduled payment is completed. Now, you'll have to have a payment schedule that's attached to the workflow, which you can do up here in the top left section. But once you have a payment schedule that is attached to the workflow, you'll see this option show up. This is if you're wanting an action to happen after a certain payment has been made. And what it does is the workflow will look at the payment schedule and all the different due dates that you have associated with that payment schedule. And then based off of one of those payments getting made, you can send something out. So if I wanted to send out an email after a deposit's been made, I can choose after scheduled payment is completed, and then it will ask what payment the workflow is watching for. So if I click the drop down, these are the 4 due dates that I have associated with this payment schedule. So if I choose 0 days after invoice has been created, this is my deposit, I can click that, and then once that payment has been made, whatever action it is that I choose will take off. The next 2 triggers we'll take a look at are after invoice paid in full and after contract signed by client. If you're wanting something to happen after the invoice gets paid in full, you can use this option. Or if you're wanting to wait for the client to sign the contract and then something go out, you can use this option here. And the last trigger that we have is after all previous actions are complete. And this is if you're wanting something to go out directly after everything before it is finished. So if you're looking at more of a sequential order of things, one after another, as soon as this gets sent, then the next one goes, you can use after all previous actions are complete. The next thing we will take a look at is office hours. If you're not wanting your clients to receive emails in the middle of the night, you can set your hours for when emails are allowed to send. If you go up here to the top left-hand corner, you'll see set office hours. And this will give you a start time and an end time. And if an email is set to go out outside of these hours, it will wait for the start time and then go out to the client. The next thing we'll go over is the workflow overview chart. And this is if you're wanting to look at all the projects that are associated to a particular workflow template. So if I have my workflow demonstration pulled up here and I click the view button in the bottom right-hand corner, it will take me to the workflow overview chart. Now on the left-hand side, you can see all the different projects that are associated with this particular workflow. You can see whether they're active, whether they're completed, if they're paused. Up across the top here, you can see all the different actions that are associated with this workflow, and then you can see the status on where they're at. So down here, you'll see the legend. If it's green, that means it's been completed. If it's yellow, that means it's still in progress. If it's red, that means there's been an error and it failed to send. And then you can also see if actions have been deleted from the job. So from here, you can also do some of the things that you would do inside the project. So if you want to mark a to-do as completed, you can check that off. And this will give you the ability to see everything from a distance, and you don't have to go into every single job just to see the status on where they're at in the workflow. After you've made an update to the master workflow template in this area, you do have the capability to update all the jobs that have this workflow applied to it. Just click the Update Job Workflows button, and any active workflow will get updated with the new information that you've added in. One thing you can do within each project is have multiple workflows running at the exact same time. Now, these workflows won't react off of each other, but they will run independently of each other, and you can have multiple to each project. So if you have a workflow that's already running, you can just go to the Apply a Workflow dropdown and find the workflow that you want to run alongside the other workflow, and then just click Apply. And then you can have two workflows running at one time within each project. And the last thing that we'll cover in this video is once you've applied a workflow to a job, how you can edit it on the fly. So once you have a workflow that's applied, you can either add an action here, and this will only be for this particular project, so it won't affect your master template at all. You can archive the workflow, which means just remove it from the project, and anything that was planned on going out will be removed. You can change the status on the workflow, whether it's paused or whether it's active here. If it's paused, that means that nothing else can go out. You won't be able to force any actions. It's completely shut down. So if you want something to start going again, you can come in, click that, and change it back to active. The other thing you can do is do the View Workflow option, and this will take you straight into the workflow overview chart that we just covered. So if you're in a particular project and want to see everyone who's on that workflow, you can click that View Workflow button, and it will take you directly into that particular workflow. Now, I'm also going to cover the buttons that are on the side of each one of these actions. So if you click the edit button, this will give you the ability to change what is in each action and then customize it before it actually goes out. So if you have something that you need to make customizations to before it reaches that action, you can click edit and make changes, and it won't affect your master template at all. It will just be what's involved within this project. You can remove certain actions if you want to get rid of them before they go out. If you click Mark Completed, that will mark the action as done, but it won't actually commit that action. So if you're just wanting to mark it completed, that you got it done, you can check it off, but it won't actually perform that. And then you can also do Force Now. This is if you're wanting to force an action right away, no matter where it's at in the workflow. So if I wanted to force this email down here, I can click Force Now, and it will send it out regardless of where it's at in the process.